the soldier who refused to believe the war was over. In 1974, a Japanese soldier emerged from the Philippine jungle. Rifle in hand, were uniform pressed and ready to fight. The war had ended 29 years earlier. He didn't know. And the most terrifying part? He had been following orders the entire time. His name was Hiroo Onoda. And what happened to him is one of the strangest stories to ever come out of the Second World War. A story that was buried for decades, not by governments, not by historians, but simply because no one could believe it was real.
Stay with me, because this one will change the way you think about loyalty, obedience, and what happens when a human mind refuses to let go. Lubang Island, a small, dense patch of jungle and farmland in the Philippine archipelago, roughly 70 miles southwest of Manila. In peacetime, it was nothing. In 1944, it was everything.
Hiroo Onoda arrived there in December of that year. He was 22 years old, lean, sharp-eyed, trained in guerrilla warfare at the Nakano School, one of Imperial Japan's most elite military intelligence academies. He wasn't sent to Lubang to hold a line. He wasn't sent there to wait for reinforcements. He was sent there to disappear into that jungle and fight, forever, if necessary. His commanding officer pulled him aside before departure and told him something that would define the next 3 decades of his life. He said, "You are to continue your mission regardless of what happens. Do not surrender, do not take your own life, and do not lay down your arms until you receive direct orders from me, personally. Not from the Emperor, not from Tokyo, from him, personally." Those words became the architecture of Onoda's entire existence. August 15th, 1945. Emperor Hirohito's voice crackled across radios throughout the Pacific. A voice that had never before been heard in public, now delivering the unthinkable. Japan had surrendered unconditionally. The most catastrophic conflict in human history was over. On Lubang Island, Onoda received the news. He heard the radio broadcasts. He found the leaflets dropped from Allied aircraft, printed in Japanese, signed by Japanese officials, declaring the war's end and ordering all remaining soldiers to lay down their arms. He didn't believe a single word of it. To him, it was obvious. It was enemy propaganda, a psychological operation designed to flush soldiers like him out of the jungle. His orders were clear. His commanding officer had told him personally, and no piece of paper dropped from an American airplane was going to override that. So he kept fighting. What followed is almost impossible to process if you think of it as a single stretch of time. 29 years. Think about what happened in the world during those 29 years. The Korean War began and ended. Man walked on the moon. The Beatles rose and fell. An entire generation was born, grew up, went to school, fell in love, and Hiroo Onoda was still in that jungle, still running ambushes, still sabotaging supply lines, still waiting for orders that would never come. He was not alone at first. When the war ended, 4 Japanese soldiers remained hidden on Lubang together. One surrendered in 1950. Another was killed in a firefight with Philippine police in 1954. The third, Onoda's closest companion, a man named Shoichi Shimada, was shot and killed in 1972. And then there was one. Onoda buried Shimada in the jungle floor with his own hands. He conducted a military funeral in the middle of the wilderness, alone, for an audience of no one. And then he picked up his rifle, and he kept going. The Philippine government had declared him legally dead in 1959. His family in Japan had held a funeral. The world had moved on so completely that his name existed only in history books, as a footnote, a curiosity, a man presumed long gone. But every few months, Philippine farmers and local police reported strange encounters, ambushes in the night, supply caches raided, gunfire from the tree line. For years, authorities dismissed these reports. They couldn't accept what the evidence was telling them. There was still a Japanese soldier out there, still fighting a war that had ended before most of those farmers were born. By the early 1970s, the Philippine military had launched multiple operations to find Onoda. They sent soldiers into the jungle. They broadcast messages over loudspeakers. They dropped letters from his own family, handwritten, pleading with him to come out. His mother's handwriting, his brother's voice on a recording. He heard all of it. He dismissed all of it, because none of it came from Major Taniguchi, and until Taniguchi told him the war was over, it simply wasn't over. The breakthrough came not from a government, not from a military operation, but from a 23-year-old Japanese adventurer named Norio Suzuki. Suzuki had set off on a solo expedition across Southeast Asia with a goal that his friends thought was borderline insane. He wanted to find three things before he died: a panda, the abominable snowman, and Hiroo Onoda. He found Onoda first. In 1974, Suzuki tracked him through the jungle on Lubang and simply waited. And one evening, Onoda appeared, rifle raised, eyes sharp as ever. A ghost in olive drab who had somehow stayed perfectly real. The two men talked. Suzuki told him the truth, the full truth, about how long the war had been over, about Japan's reconstruction, about the world Onoda had missed. And Onoda listened, quietly, the way a man listens when he already knows the answer but needs to hear it said out loud. But he still would not lay down his rifle. Not for a stranger, not without orders. Suzuki returned to Japan. He went to the Japanese government. He tracked down Major Taniguchi, who by 1974 was no longer a soldier, but a bookseller in a small Japanese town, and he brought him back to Lubang Island. On March 9, 1974, in a small clearing in the Philippine jungle, Major Yoshimi Taniguchi, now a 60-year-old man in civilian clothes, stood before Hiroo Onoda and read the official order aloud. "Lieutenant Onoda, your long years of hard work are over. I am relieving you of your duties. You are to cease all combat activity and lay down your arms." Onoda stood at attention. He listened without moving, and when it was finished, he removed his rifle from his shoulder, the same rifle he had maintained and cleaned every single day for 29 years. And he placed it on the ground. He wept, not from relief, not entirely. He wept, he would later say, for all of it, for the soldiers who had died beside him, for the Philippine civilians caught in crossfire they never asked for the decades of his life spent inside a war that existed, in the end, only inside his own mind. He was 52 years old. He had entered that jungle at 22. His parents were dead. His country had been rebuilt from rubble into an economic powerhouse. Everything he had known was gone, and he had never stopped fighting for it. When Onoda returned to Japan, the country didn't know how to feel about him. He was celebrated in some quarters as the ultimate symbol of loyalty and discipline, a man who had embodied the old Bushido code completely, without compromise, without wavering. He was a living relic of a Japan that had ceased to exist, but others felt something more complicated, something closer to grief. Because Onoda's story wasn't just about one man. It was about an entire system, a military culture so built around absolute obedience that it had consumed one of its own soldiers whole, swallowed 30 years of his life, and never once looked back to ask what had happened to him. He was not a hero trapped in the jungle. He was a man trapped in an order, and no one had ever thought to rescind it. Onoda left Japan not long after his return. He said the country had changed too much, that the values he had given his life for were no longer visible anywhere he looked. He moved to Brazil, bought a ranch, started a life from scratch in his 50s. He eventually returned to Japan in his later years. He wrote a memoir. He gave lectures to young people about discipline and survival and the importance of a clear purpose. He never expressed bitterness. He never claimed he had been wronged. He said simply that he had done what he believed was right, and that a man who does what he believes is right can never truly be called a failure. Hiroo Onoda died on January 16, 2014.
He was 91 years old. There is something that stays with you long after you finish learning about Hiroo Onoda. Something that goes beyond the sheer strangeness of the timeline, beyond the survival, beyond the loyalty that outlasted the thing it was loyal to.
It is this. He was not broken. He was not weak. He was not a fool. By every measure, Hiroo Onoda was an extraordinarily capable, intelligent, and mentally resilient human being. He survived conditions that would have destroyed most people within months. He maintained his physical health, his mental clarity, his sense of purpose, for nearly 3 decades in isolation. And that is precisely what makes his story so haunting. Because the question his life forces you to ask is not, how could someone be so blind? The question is, how much of what I believe with absolute certainty, right now today, is just an order I was given a long time ago, by someone whose authority I never thought to question. How many of us are still fighting wars that ended years ago? How many of us are still in the jungle? This has been the story of Hiroo Onoda, the last soldier of the Second World War.